everybody. Welcome back to your Dawn of Autonomy podcast. I'm Don Zoldi, your host, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting, and publisher at Autonomy Global. It is Defense Tech Month, sponsored by Volatus Aerospace, and we are in a two-part series from GrandSKY. What an amazing show we're going to have for you today. I can't wait. We've got Tom Swoyer, I call him the Grand Poobah out there. He knows everybody, and he was able to grab Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Limeberry here from OSD. We're going to hear all about them in a second. But everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, let's just go ahead and roll. Let's go with you, Tom, first. For those that don't know you, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Sure. And thanks for having me on, Don. I'm excited to be here. I'm Tom Swoyer. I'm the founder and president of GrandSKY, a UAS flight operations center in Grand Forks, North Dakota. We operate on Grand Forks Air Force Base, and we are the home of Project Ultra. We are also the home to the Northrop Grumman Sky Range mission, where they're repurposing older RQ-4 Global Hawks, and home of the General Atomics Flight Test and Training Center, along with a variety of other tenants. So the Northern Plains Test Site and their Vantas network is also housed at GrandSKY. So bringing all those parts together, I develop, finance, and market GrandSKY for everybody.
Well, Tom, it might have been easier just to say what's not at GrandSKY, frankly. Well, I know Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry is physically not at GrandSKY right now. So let's learn a little bit about him. Matt, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. Yeah, Lieutenant Colonel Matt Limeberry. I'm the commander of Task Force RAPTR and the director of technology readiness experimentation for Office of the Undersecretary of War for Research and Engineering. Careerist military intelligence officer by trade, just happened to, by chance, fall into this technology advancements capability arena within the department to accelerate tech to the warfighter. Not physically in North Dakota. We'll get to that part of where we'll be in the future, but currently at Camp Atterbury, Indiana, where we are actually in the middle of technology readiness experimentation 26-2, ongoing right now in Indiana, where tech is evolving at the speed of relevance. So happy to be here, happy to take a break from the action and tell you all what we do every day for the department and the warfighter at large.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Colonel Limeberry, we hear a lot about drone dominance, right? We're hearing about these gauntlets, et cetera. But, you just gave another acronym that, frankly, some people might not know about, RAPTR, RAPTR. It's a task force. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so RAPTR, Rapid Assessment of Prototype Technology Readiness. And if the department does anything really well, it is the acronym use in a multitude of. And it's thematic too, because I say RAPTR and I'll say T-Rex, Technology Readiness Experimentation. But our task force was developed. There was a gap in the department's ability to accelerate innovative technology. Acquisition cycles were too long, and we needed a way to, how do we find a faster way to push technology into the warfighter's hands, validate technical maturity of tech, and push it forward faster than we've done in the past, where it was fragmented, disjointed, single lens viewed, where we can open the aperture to a multitude of problem sets and find that technology in a scalable, repeatable process for the department at large to make sure that we're solving the right problems at the right time, at the right speed for the warfighters to be successful in competing against pacing and adversarial threats.
Okay, very cool. And Tom, we're going to get to you in 1 second, so hold tight. But Matt, it's, everybody's heard about the Defense Innovation Unit, right? Yeah. I understand the Blue List transferred over to DCMA and everything like that. Mm-hmm. We're kind of in this ecosystem of kind of emerging technologies and rapid acquisition. Where do you guys fall, or do you intersect with those other offices, or how actually does it work? Just to be clear with the audience, because they may not know.
Yeah, so RAPTR and T-Rex is not an acquisition arm. We closely coordinate with DIU, with the interagency, the program acquisition executives. We are the data maturation and data collection point of where technology meets the ecosystem. So our point is just data collect, validate technical maturity of technologies coming into the system, and say, does it make sense for the department to continue looking at acquisition processes into the future? So no acquisition authority, just validating it works, make the recommendation forward of, hey, this is great and working. And then we take feedback from other DIU entities. So if DIU finds something that's like, hey, does this make sense? Should we move forward? We can be that test bed to make sure, yes, it makes sense for the department or service or combatant command to move forward with that prototype or technology to accelerate at speed.
Okay, awesome. And then Tom, for your part, GrandSKY, I know you celebrated. When was your decade? Your
Just
decade?
last year.
It was, right. Okay, that was my memory. I just didn't want to throw it out there and to be wrong. So last year you celebrated 10 years out there. And you made this incredible, I don't even want to call it a commercial UAS park, although I think there might be some marketing out. It's really obviously dual use. You're on a military base. I mean, how is all of this even possible?
Well, it's all possible through, a whole lot of hoping and praying, and a little bit of money. We just set out to figure out a way to create a UAS operations center, knowing that Grand Forks Air Force Base had a UAS mission. They had the RQ-4 Global Hawk. And we set out and said, it would be a lot easier if they could maintain the Global Hawks by turning right at the end of the runway when they land instead of turning left when Northrop needed to do some maintenance. And that just spiraled up from there. We've just accelerated. And we have most of our time and investment energy is around creating the infrastructure and creating the amenities that companies need to fly UAS. So from our beyond line of sight system that we work very closely with the Northern Plains Test Site on, to just the basic pipes, wires, and ramps and runways and safety equipment that enable UAS operations of all sizes. So we continue to invest year after year in all of that infrastructure. Okay,
very good. And for those that haven't had a chance to visit North Dakota, I highly encourage you to do it. Every year in October, there's the UAS Summit annually. What a great event just to experience the entire ecosystem out there. So absolutely check that out. Colonel Limeberry, there may be people listening in that don't understand the way the military is structured. And they may not completely understand that the Office of the Undersecretary of War for Research and Engineering is a very high level office, right? So presumably, Pentagon people with titles that dwell there. So what does that positioning what does that give your team?
Yeah, it's placement and access. Although I wear the Army uniform, but working for the Undersecretary of War for Research and Engineering, and if you go down a level and two levels, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of War for Prototyping and Experimentation, where we meet this niche of capability gaps and technology matching them. We are a joint functionality. We aren't just sole single service provider of looking at Army or Marine or Navy or single service requirements, or even single combatant command requirements, where you still have joint flavor, but they've got their own vacuumed or focused areas of requirement. We look at the totality of the threat-informed landscape across all service combatant commands and help find those creative solutions, innovative technologies to get after the totality of the problem and bring to bear, the department's true capabilities, whether it's the overarching umbrella of funding, that we can find innovative pathways. But it's just a great span of control and access that you don't get in a single service view, that we can see everything. And what we find success in is the Army may be working on something really well, the Marine Corps, but sitting at this OUSW R&E level, we can actually reach down and pull those innovative techs up that may be solving a single problem for the Army, but we find value and it could solve a broader problem for the department at large, and we can help escalate and elevate those requirements forward. So it's a pretty unique place to sit and a great opportunity to solve problems at the grand scale level of the department at large.
No, I mean, it's so important to break down those stovepipes, right? And especially, where funds are limited, but like a technology can cut across different needs. And for you to be in a position, kind of a perch to see all of that, that's really cool. But,
Right.
Raptor itself and T-Rex, there's always a reason why these programs are created. So what problems exactly were you trying to solve? We know the DIU problem was that rapid acquisition, right?
Mm-hmm.
For you, it sounds like it's testing and evaluation of these technologies, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. How would you describe like the problems that, led to the origin of these offices?
Yeah, well, it ties into the nexus of what DIU is trying to solve. I mean, if you look at the grand scale, acquisition timeline was the problem, and innovative acceleration was the problem, and still continues to be the problem. At large, there are still, outdated policies and bureaucratic ways of business that still hamper progression. If you look at the procurement cycle of 5 to 7 years, that was old school business, but designed for large technology requirements. If you're talking, MRAPs or large aircraft, F-35, for example, I mean, that's a multi-year acquisition, as such, and it should be, because there is a lot of due diligence required to make such a large and exquisite platform. But not every problem requires an exquisite solution. There are innovative technologies and capabilities out there that exist that are game changing, but aren't necessarily exquisite. They're simple solution sets. Every exquisite problem is just a series of simple problems just stacked on top of themselves. And if we can find the innovative tech to fix those small, easy solution problems, then that's where we want to focus our efforts in our capabilities. So I'd say speed of relevance is where we try to focus our effort, speed of delivery and experimentation, and finding ways to field technology within 18 to 24 months. And in my opinion, you'd ask me, that's still too long. As the war in Ukraine and the threat-informed environment, technology is iterating, every 2 to 4 weeks. We're trying to get to the scale and capability, but our 18-month sweet spot of finding a capability, realizing that it fills the gap, and then pushing that forward into experimentation campaigns to solve, to get to the warfighter's hand, really where we're focusing our effort.
Okay, awesome. And Tom, one of many things that you do at GrandSKY is afford people the ability to do some testing, on your campus. But what other problem? Tell me the problems you're trying to solve in creating GrandSKY, and what other problems you're solving out there right now.
So I think the first problem was just having a place that people could fly drones reliably, legally, in a wider area, adding the beyond line of sight capability in the 11,000 square miles of coverage area that we have, which is growing, by the way. I think we're going to add almost another 11,000 square miles. And so, adding those capabilities. But then, Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry talks about this, and it's the speed of relevance. It's the speed with which we can get you flying, the speed with which you can call us on a Monday and be flying on a Thursday. That doesn't work that way for everybody all the time, but we have the capabilities. We are up and running 24/7. And so that speed capability with all the other resources, amenities, and infrastructure that somebody might need, companies are finding a lot of value in counter-UAS companies testing new sensors and new detectors. Are finding a lot of value because they can set up and see all of the different flight activities that are happening around GrandSKY, which includes manned and unmanned aircraft. And so, creating that whole operational environment, 4 seasons, cold weather testing, we're particularly adept at. And so bringing all those things together in one place, one point of contract, we call it. We can bring the Northern Plains test site. We can bring academic research support, data gathering, data collection, and then all the basic things of battery charging, maintenance, fueling, all the simple aviation things that are, the traditional aviation challenges, like getting an aircraft off the ground and getting it into the airspace safely. We bring all that together.
Okay, great. Now, at some point you two met And there's a connection here. So let's cover that before we kind of dive deep into a very important topic, Tom, that you just raised, which is counter-UAS, because this is really, besides that, the kind of the small attritable one-way attack drones, it seems to be the coin of the realm. And not just on the defense side, quite frankly. Counter-UAS is something everyone's looking at now with like the 250th birthday coming up, the FIFA World Cup, the Olympics down the road. So domestically for Homeland Security, this is just a huge issue for everybody right now. But tell us that kind of connection story. Like how do you guys work together, or how did you meet? What's the connection here?
Well, I'll start that out if I can, sir. The Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry and his boss, Assistant Secretary Tran, were here in Grand Forks along with the Task Force RAPTR team, members of the Task Force RAPTR team, to look at hosting and what it would take to host a T-Rex type event here in North Dakota. And so heretofore, all T-Rex events have been at Camp Atterbury and maybe one or two other locations, but mostly at Camp Atterbury in Indiana, and they've had great success. But I think that the compelling, pressing need to do this more often is requiring them to look at other locations. So we met here in Grand Forks. They came up. We scheduled a convenient snowstorm in December for them to get them trapped at the hotel. Here.
When you were talking about the weather, Tom, I was thinking, that I was in the Air Force. I think you both know that. The why not, my not, reason's the reason. Yeah, for sure.
Well, Grand Forks, we have great hospitality when 12 inches of snow come down on the ground, and he's planning to drive out to Bismarck to the state capitol. And so we convinced them to stay here in Grand Forks, which gave us a whole night to visit and chat and talk about how T-Rex works and what people get out of it. And they were able to learn about what's going on at Grand Forks Air Force Base, what's going on at GrandSKY, what's going on in Project Ultra. So we really, candidly, the snowstorm was a big favor because we were able to have much deeper conversations, more in-depth conversation about where the synergy can be between what Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry is trying to accomplish and what we try to accomplish. And so thanks to Mother Nature, the snowstorm worked in our favor.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry, I'm sure you've been to a bunch of different places looking around, where you can do this testing. And, I think one of the really unique things that struck me about GrandSKY when I was out there, especially being from the Air Force and being a lawyer, was the fact that this thing is, this thing called GrandSKY is on the Grand Forks Air Force Base flight line. And I think that makes it super unique in a very positive way with regard to working with the DoD. So Tom raised something. I want to go back to you, Colonel Limeberry, about over that evening, Tom got to learn about how T-Rex works. Well, how does it work?
Yeah, Tom was right, and weather played favor there because where we were going to spend 1 hour, we ended up spending a multitude of hours, kind of breaking down what is this thing? What is this prehistoric animal we keep talking about? So technology, readiness, experimentation. It's this unique tier 1 experimentation campaign, and I say tier 1, and I'll lay that out in the conversation. But it's the initial entry point for defense technologies to come into the ecosystem. It's a large-scale experimentation event. Usually runs twice a year, and Tom's right. Mostly at Camp Atterbury, Indiana. Because that's where the task force is located. There's some great relationships here for ease of use of the ranges and the complexes here. But it's a synergistic and collaborative space for industry, academia, services, government to come together on operationally relevant ranges and capability sets to test and experiment and demonstrate their capability. T-Rex is the charter of our task force is accelerate that innovative technology, but everything works well in a laboratory of these innovative technologies when they're just, ruminating and just coming up with ideas. When it's 70 degrees in a vacuum and, white gloves, it works every time, all the time.
Yep.
But what happens when these technologies, get thrust into, okay, now there's humidity and now there's wind and there's rain and, the same weather hazards that you'll experience in overseas environments, we have to make sure that the tech works operationally relevant environments as well. So we put them through the paces. If they give us a slick sheet that says, say, aircraft, for example, has an endurance of 8 hours and it can carry a 10-pound payload, well, then we make sure that it can carry a 10-pound payload for 8 hours, but out of the lab. Show us you can do what you say you can do, and that's good for the government. We help validate that process here, because I'd much rather buy the risk down here, on a closed range, than push the risk forward to a warfighter when they need to use it at the time of need and point of need overseas, when lives matter and depend on the tech that we give them. So T-Rex, that's the concept and the application of how we do it. They're thematic, though. We can't do everything and all things all the time. So we find the operational problems of the department. And you mentioned counter-UAS, that complements our effort of low-cost, short-range air defense. Just think of no longer just group 1s and 2s, but we're looking at group 3s into the larger platforms of low-cost, short-range air defense. Same concept and construct, but JIATA 401 took that counter-UAS, like the small UAS mission, and that's their specialty. We complement effort in the equities in the larger scale, but it's not only the low-cost short-range air defense. We've done resilient communications. We've done autonomous ground vehicles, integrated base defense. We've done contested logistics, a multitude of things. FPV and different concepts and use of platforms. And you made a great point of one-way attack platforms. You've heard of Lucas being used in Operation Epic Fury. That was born of T-Rex, which is a huge factor of finding a capability, understanding where the gaps exist and accelerating that capability into the gap and filling the need and causing a drastic impact to the warfight and its lethality across the force. So of all of that, we are looking to expand, and I think we'll get into that. But Tom's alluded to that conversation has opened doors to future franchise and export opportunities for our team to try something new in a different environment that matters in this current national security space.
Well, it absolutely matters. I think that was probably the biggest lesson learned out of Ukraine and early on, right? As you said, the slick sheets, the promises, people bring their drones out there and they're falling out of the sky, or they're not flying the way they were supposed to be flying. Just unrelated. It's got to be real. And,
right.
If you can't do it in Ukraine or on a battlefield, like you said, you got to do in advance to buy down that risk. We had an event here. It was a little commercial event. It was out in Buena Vista, right near the mountain. And there's like 14ers all around it, like Mount Princeton, and a company brought their drone, they had a little demo day. They couldn't get it off the ground because of the elevation. And boy, were they embarrassed. And and like this is a legit company that's selling to a lot of people, but they've never been to Colorado. And so, that's a great example. And then, of course, Tom's environment, just that you mentioned wind, rain, snow and sleet and icing. All of those things, GrandSKY can bring literally to the fight. So, Tom, that's a great segue. Tell everybody, what you believe, GrandSKY brings to, kind of experimental, I'll call them exercises or events that T-Rex puts on, and what infrastructure makes all of that possible that other sites just don't have.
We, that's a great question. A lot of it is really just not sexy infrastructure. There are ramps and vertical takeoff and landing pads and the runway and a variety of different, like I said before, the ability to fuel and defuel aircraft and the ability to see things. We have very simple topography around the Grand Forks area. It's relatively flat, so you can see things coming and going. We have great relationships with landowners all around us, so you're not limited just to 200 acres at GrandSKY. We can get out and set up operations out in other farms Farmers love us to come out and get out there and fly aircraft, land at different places, demonstrate different kinds of mission sets. And like Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry said, you're doing it out in the real world. What are the wind effects? What happens when a storm front starts to move towards you and the winds pick up? We've invested a lot in weather prediction, so we can really understand what is coming in our direction and know when we are safe to fly and not fly. And then a lot of the work we're doing around Project Ultra is opening up traffic management in the airspace. And so working with the tower, working with partners like AFRL and the Clue system, we just brought in Resilient X to show us what their USS can do. We've got great partners in AeroVironment. We're using their system right now for ground-based sense and avoid, and they're bringing in millions of dollars worth of equipment to set up a counter-UAS demonstration center. Instead of bringing their equipment everywhere in the world to show customers, they're going to bring their customers to see the equipment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's going to be a great thing. So really, I think the important part is real world dynamics, where we are definitely working on proving out how traffic management can work. And I say traffic management, people talk about UTM. It's all air traffic. And so we need to integrate manned and unmanned air traffic. And we need to be able to figure out, when drones are flying, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. So we are very heavily focused on detection, identification, and tracking. We have great partners across the runway. The new Point Defense Battle Lab that Air Combat Command set up at Grand Forks Air Force Base is great. They're really looking at how do they detect, track, and shoot down. We are really working on how are we going to detect, track, and identify and know who's who, because we're also running lots of logistics flights between Grand Forks to Cavalier Space Force Station. We're going to do 50 of those flights this summer, carrying 50-pound payloads. And so Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry, our mission is, as he says, can this really do this? Prove that it's doing this. Show us how this works. Show us how the BV loss operations work. Show us how it's going to land, unload cargo, load new cargo on, come back and repeat that 50 or so times, 52 times exactly before September 1st is our goal. And so, we see that as leaning towards then how do we support battlefield logistics with that in a contested environment where there is counter UAS activities and counter drone activities going on. So it's trying to bring all that together in a real environment.
Yeah. So the Cavalier flights that you're talking about, Cavalier Space Station, that's Project Ultra, which is its own acronym. Yeah. And by the way, everybody, we did a worldwide release of Project Ultra with Tom and some other members out there in North Dakota about 2 years ago already. And Chris Hewlett, who's one of the leaders of Project Ultra, will, if you guys are running around Exponential today and you're taking the time to watch this, Chris is going to be on a panel tomorrow, Thursday, May 14th, as part of Law Tech Connect, talking about Project Ultra. So be sure to dial into that. And if you can't do it in person, we'll be taping those and putting that out as a Law Tech Connect online later. So great stuff happening out there, Tom, clearly. You talked about the physical infrastructure, the digital infrastructure. I think the third, let's just call it leg of the stool, three-legged stool, would be the regulatory authority. And, I imagine both you and Colonel Limeberry, even though he's in the Department of War and they have special authorities and tracks to do testing, I still imagine it's difficult to do, like, no kidding, counter UAS testing, if you will. I want to throw it out to both of you because I was just recently at the GeoInt Symposium 2026 in Denver. And Michael Robbins from AUVSI was actually moderating a panel with Shield AI, a space company, a handful of people. And that was kind of a point of conversation. Leidos, I think, was on it. They're talking about, there's still gaps and we need to fill those gaps. But that's part of the challenge is, getting approvals to do like live, mitigation, in the United States for obvious reasons, lots of risks. So, Tom, I'll go to you first, and then Colonel Limeberry, because you guys hold unique authorities and have done probably similar testing before. Like, how do you do it? So, Tom, over to you first.
Like I mentioned before, Don, we are focused very heavily on detect, track, and identify.
Yeah.
We want to know good guys from bad guys. We want to integrate drones safely into the national airspace.
Yep.
So all of our work happens in the national airspace. Even though we are on Grand Forks Air Force Base, we don't have any restricted airspace access. The North Dakota National Guard has restricted airspace about 70 miles to our west. And I foresee a relationship where we will use that more often in the future because you can do destructive testing there. But there are not a lot of places you can do destructive testing outside a military range environment. And most of the ranges were set up for exquisite systems like F-35 and F-22, like Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry said. And, the ability to then do actual data collection on a range for smaller UAS is harder. And so the systems don't really exist right now. So building those systems out to allow that testing, because it's one thing to show that test at, say, Yuma Proving Ground or Dugway, and another one to replicate that environment or replicate the test environment in at Eglin Air Force Base, where you have a maritime environment, replicating those things so tests matter across all the test locations. So building that software, that data capability, the data transport capability is important. Building the tests in realistic environments, not in a vacuum. Not all the wars are going to be fought in the desert. And so we need to have systems that test in those different environments. So for us, being able to fly beyond line of sight, having relationships with landowners that I can set acoustic sensors up 7 kilometers away from GrandSKY, where the operations center is, where the notional place infrastructure to be attacked is. And then I can fly in from 10 or 12 kilometers out safely because we know where all the airspace is being managed and how it's being managed and what's in the airspace. And then we can set up and tie in all the acoustic sensors, passive radars, all the different tools that are needed, including active radar, to be able to detect. Setting up that detection layer in depth. In my experience so far, Don, we have not found any one system that is able to do it all.
Yeah,
Most
that's what I'm hearing.
Great at one thing, but not everything. And so building multi-layered systems with products from lots of companies all integrated together in an open source way. Stuff that's not open source anymore isn't going to get the time of day. You need to be able to API into a common operating picture. So from my point of view, building those systems where people can just plug right in, that is 100% our focus.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And, no joke, the detect, identify, track, VIT part of this, equation, that's, you make it sound easy, Tom, but I know it's not easy. We just recently had a webinar with Jennifer Richter and Haley Preacher from Aiken talking about just these FCC approvals for any RF technology. It's no joke. Like, I know this is a Herculean effort that you do every day. So, Colonel Limeberry, over to you, because obviously the DoD has ranges, or DOW, whatever we're calling it today. I can't get it out of my head. I'm sorry. It's just always Department of Defense to me. There's White Sands Missile Range, there's Nellis Air Force Base. They do a lot of, kind of blue on red type stuff out there. But I'm sure this has been quite a journey for you as well and your team.
Yeah, Tom hit it right. We are just fortunate in the department, and we have access to these, restricted airspace and the capability to do, the detect, track, interdict kinetically and non-kinetically. So I think there's just it's an opportunity for us to, and that's why T-Rex also exists, is to allow these industry partners to come to a space that doesn't exist in the public market, but they can come to a space that's safe, that we control and demonstrate full capability of their systems. Now, I say the future is that we are working closely with FAA for test site approvals. Indiana and Oklahoma were just awarded, new FAA drone test site authorizations, which will
Yeah.
help enhance some of the beyond line of sight corridor requirements in the national airspace, through what there's risk mitigation you have to do, ADS-B and transponders and beyond, and due regard of tracking vehicles in the air. But I think the agencies, the intergovernmental requirements, the whole of government approach is catching on and understanding that we can no longer do this isolated at single range test ranges in the United States. That works in a small capacity within group 1 to 2. But when you're talking platforms that can stay in the air for 7 to 8 days at a time, well, you don't just want to burn circles in the air over one single space. You have to exercise the authorities and the capability to its true full extent, which is where I think conversations are leading. And I think policy is trying to catch up and get us to a point where we can be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I no doubt, you've been using some of the buzzwords, the speed of relevance, tied directly into the drone dominance push and all of that. So it's definitely interesting times in kind of the drone, counter drone world right now. But we're getting short on our time, and I want to make sure that we cover kind of where you guys are going next, because when we talk about like 12 to 24 months, and I know Colonel Limeberry, you said, I think it was maybe even 18 months right now is your sweet spot in terms of, from testing to kind of bringing something on board, some success with the recent operations in Iran and the Lucas platform that you mentioned. Where do you see T-Rex headed over the next 12 to 24 months, though?
Yeah, so focus is going to continue to be low-cost, short-range air defense. Indiana is the anchor point for the things that we do at Camp Atterbury. This is just home base for us. But, as we've touched on, we need to find a place that, we need to be location agnostic as well. How do we export this same capability to places like North Dakota, find an opportunity to test in different environments that have different operational environmental effects? And it's not only North Dakota. When we're looking at, opportunities with allies and partners, so Australia, looking to find ways to test in different countries of origin that want the same capability to, bolster defense industrial base and replicate the same process. So as we look at low-cost short-range air defense, we look at the exportability of our processes and our mechanisms. There are larger problems we're going to try and solve in the future. I mentioned contested logistics is going to be a continual drumbeat. I think in the next few months, how do we control multi-domain collaborative autonomy? How do we do platforms across, the surface, the water, the air, and orchestrate those together? So I think we are on a verge of, finding ways and finding opportunities to expand our reach across the U.S. and abroad of placing T-Rex and what we're calling franchise models into the future.
Awesome. By the way, speaking of collaborative autonomy, if you guys missed the Blue Arrow worldwide premiere, we were with Olga Pagoda from Ukraine talking about their RII, which means swarm platform. So for command and control, really awesome. Check that out if you missed it. Really great stuff. A lot of great tech coming out, Colonel Limeberry. So if you ever get bored and you want an education, you don't need to look at an RFP solicitation. Just scan our website, my friend, Autonomy Global. You will find all kinds of amazing people on this podcast and in our articles. But Tom, for you, what is next for GrandSKY? So many things going on out there. Where do you see your ecosystem going?
I see our ecosystem moving in a couple directions simultaneously. First and foremost, we will continue to be supporting Project Ultra and airspace traffic management and integrating the counter-UAS activities with contested logistics, like Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry just said. The logistics thing is going to then take us into flights between Grand Forks and Minot Air Force Base across North Dakota, I believe, using Class 3 aircraft. And so we're starting that this summer. We'll start doing that, do all the flights to Cavalier And then we're going to start doing some flights in a corridor out to Camp Grafton. So we'll be creating that triangle of UAS traffic management. And then we'll start to add in the extended range out to Minot. That then really shows across a broader environment. And that is not a small feat, because we're talking 200 plus miles one way, where weather impacts are going to show up and traffic impacts are going to show up. And you've got to know how you're going to be able to get there safely, deconflict that airspace, manage your frequencies, manage your command and control. And so Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry and Task Force RAPTR are looking at low-cost solutions, especially low-cost counter-UAS. There is nothing in the counter-UAS space I have found that's low-cost yet. Everything has multiple commas and zeros. And I know we're trying to get it all down, but just the sheer computing requirements to manage the airspace and know what you're looking at, and to be able to do it at scale.
Yeah.
We've seen counter UAS systems. They say, oh, well, we can defeat swarms. I haven't seen one work yet that can defeat more than 3 or 4. So you send 10 in and it's tougher. You can detect them all, but the operator becomes quickly overwhelmed. So the autonomy piece is crucial to all this, to be able to acutely defend critical infrastructure. So that's where I see us going. Logistics, contested critical infrastructure protection. And then, of course, we have our friends at Sky Range and TRMC, which is now dealing with all the hypersonic missile defense and that kind of the larger high-end stuff of Golden Dome. So we're hitting the entire stack of Class 1 through Class 5 UAS.
Well, that's incredible. And, I'm going to ask you guys each both the same question now as we come to the end of the show. The question everybody's been wanting to know is, how do they get involved in what you're doing? How do they tap in to your efforts, your ecosystem? So I'm going to start first with Colonel Limeberry and end with you, Tom. So Colonel Limeberry, over to you.
Yeah, the way to get connected, points of contact on this podcast that will be provided, cto.mil is the RNE website, and then LinkedIn. We do a lot of open solicitation on LinkedIn on net cost to industry to participate at lowest barrier to entry. Get involved, get connected. If you've got something relevant, we'll make sure it gets in front of somebody important, and we'll see if it works.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for everything you do. And thank you for your service, of course, Colonel Limeberry. Really appreciate it. It's great to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. And then, Tom, how do people tap into GrandSKY's ginormous ecosystem?
Certainly, email, as Lieutenant Colonel said, my email address, I think, is being posted on our website. We are very interested in all manner of detection sensors, the AP and the sensors that can be integrated with multiple different C2 systems that we have, and bringing that all together. So the more the merrier. We have a lot of capability to be able to interconnect a lot of systems, connected to the Point Defense Battle Lab, connected to Grand Forks Air Force Base. I would say the Point Defense Battle Lab has an RFI out for different technologies currently. And you can find that on the Grand Forks PDBL website. And getting to us, I agree, LinkedIn is one of the best ways to get a hold of us. We check into that routinely. That's actually the first place I met Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry was LinkedIn. And I said, wait a minute, I'm following you on LinkedIn when I met him in person. So, that's a powerful tool and a great communication platform.
It is. Frankly, we're streaming there right now. And, it's one of my largest crowds, quite frankly, on social media. So on that note, we want to thank everybody that dialed in and took the time to watch this as well. Tom, thank you so much for sponsoring this GrandSKY series across the year, for bringing Lieutenant Colonel Limeberry to the show, and of course, for everything you do out there in North Dakota, and not just North Dakota, we know globally. We'll talk some other time maybe about Norway or other places. So on that note, that's a little teaser. That's all she wrote, everybody. We are out here.